to finish my sentence, I was about to say it's kind of like a scale, and that the scales you can think of, this metaphorical scale is that we have been piling on all negative stuff on one side of the scale and piling on positive things on the other side of the scale. But one of the differences is that uh, now we're piling on the scale on the side of joy and happiness and wholesome, and no longer piling stuff on the side of the scale that's unwholesome, feel bad, selfish, etc. All right. And that over time we keep piling on wholesome, it begins to tip the scales.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what you're beginning to experience is that the in fact just by piling on the good side, that means the very heavy weighty stuff that was on the other side of the scale actually now is being lightened up, is beginning to get balanced out. And not only that, but let us say that it has the quality of over time rotting away.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm gonna ask a question that relates to that, and it's specifically about memory and my personal experience of how over time when you practice, you don't really remember your events in your life. You start to forget important things that you thought were important, like, oh, this girl that I once loved, or this birthday, or this. It seems like they're literally like, I was gonna ask, I guess I'll ask now. Like, if a person keeps practicing this more and more, and it keeps getting more and more fermented, or ingrained, uh will do they even have a sense of memory, and that sense of like like dulling, like daydreaming back into, you know
All right. Um, First thing that I wanted to do, that I didn't finish the sentence and then we got off onto it. So I'd like to back up to say, again, congratulations that you're making progress, that you're beginning to recognize things that are happening,
yeah.
things that you ignored for many years. And now you're waking up. And uh, part of that then is the waking up to say, wait a minute, what I used to think was wholesome is no longer wholesome.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It can be a little bit like a, like I said, it's not cut and dry as I used to think.
Right.
Moralism
And uh, there have been statements throughout history, one liners and whatnot, that were packed with wisdom that we can use with this. You probably heard the expression beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
yeah, I love that.
All right, you know exactly what it means, except that um, beauty is not in the eye of the beholder, it's behind the eyes of the beholder.
I see where
And,
you're going. Yeah.
and what I say behind it is also in the sense of later in progression of time, though it be only a split second, but that the eye saw the object, okay, the object of beauty, but I'm using just the plain the object. The eye sees the object, and then the past memory systems are used to come up with a perception, and that perception then is the beauty that's added to the object. That the object itself doesn't have any beauty, but neither does the eye that sees it. That the beauty comes out of the memory base.
Yeah, like I've heard that in drawing, where it's like imagination is just a memory. It's just memory.
Right. Well, imagination is nothing but rearranged memory. That in fact, invention is nothing but rearranged memory.
You like, okay, I see. Like you mean inventions in the sense of like
An
creativity.
airplane,
How is that memory?
the first, very, very first airplane, where was it?
I'm not, it was Amelia Earhart, right? Is that it? Is that the lady? No, she's the first lady who flew across the Pacific or something.
Okay, all right. But you're not going in the right direction. The very, very first airplane was a bird, if you want to think about it that way.
I thought about that, but I was like, is that how far this goes in the sense of genetics, if you're
In the
talking about that?
sense that the human being, the first human that built the first airplane, built something that he had in his imagination was nothing but the memory of bird being rearranged.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense.
It
Like,
cannot be any other way.
yeah, it's interesting and strange because then again, like that's where the question, because the question lies in the ignorance. If there is no ignorance, then do you create new memories?
We reconstruct old memory.
But what
And
about the new moments? Every moment is like like it can be created
that's
as
that's new input, and that new input will then be the next moment's memory.
okay.
And you have to understand that time itself is fluid in a way that we really don't understand.
Oh yeah, that's a few. I'm gonna
Because
ask you a question about that too.
that in fact, I think that the humans have gone absolutely gaga ignorant, and that the ignorance is the clock. And then we have other kinds of terms like time is money. Look in the clock.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Time is, that's by the way the key on a treasure map or something in an old movie. Time is money. Look in the clock. And the stash of the treasure was in this old clock in the house. But that's the whole idea that we have is that our time is worth something. Our time is valuable, and in fact, time is not important. Or excuse me, time. The delusion is that time is important, and in fact, we could go so far as to say that it's the quality of making things important that is the cause of suffering.
It is,
Um,
yeah.
and that I use it in the sense of importance because um, look at how many things that people were confused about they thought was important, and they wound up causing an enormous amount of suffering trying to fix what they thought was wrong. Mhm.
Hi.
Okay. A clear example of that is the issue of right to life versus abortion. The
Mm,
right to
yeah,
lifers hold something really, really important to themselves.
yeah. Well,
Okay,
yeah.
and they call it the right to life, and that's really, really important. And look how much suffering and damage. And I mean, you can go so far as to say that the politics of America is all screwed up. Everyone carrying their own important little idea, using it as a weapon to bash other people. What I
Yeah,
think is
that's
important. In fact, this is an understanding then, hmm, taking this a little bit further, importance and the thing that gives, or that the quality of importance itself is self itself. Now, let me unpack that for you. What's the most important thing
depends on what you're
to
thinking.
you? To
Mm,
you.
yeah.
Over the years, what's been the most important thing to you?
Truth.
No, you. You are the most important thing to you.
Wow, yeah. Oh man, that's I never thought about it that way. Because I guess it's the adventure makes it seem so noble when really it's not.
The fish in the water does not know that it's in the water until it comes out of the water. Once the fish is landed, now he recognizes where the water comes from or what the water was. That was his home. Okay. So now we're introducing to you the concept that suffering comes from making things important when in fact they don't have any importance other than that which we give them. This is back then to beauty is in the eye of the beholder, importance is in the mind of the beholder.
And that's incredible. Because, like in that sense, like, I guess in a mind way, you are the creator
Hmm.
of your feelings, at least, right?
Okay, so also then we could say that what's important is what's coming from our past,
Yeah.
because that's how we created importance. Well, guess who teaches us importance?
A society, of course.
Our parents are the first. They
Yeah,
think they think that little brat's important. So they
yeah,
change his diapers and shove food in his mouth and take it to the doctor, and they
yeah,
try to train up that child in the way he should go because they think that child is important. And so that sense of importance is given down generation by generation, one after the other. You could also go so far as to start looking at, well, what is original sin? Original sins are the bad habits that the Father teaches the Son generation after generation after
yeah.
generation.
That's literally what the Bible says. Like they literally, in the sense of generations, they will pass down their own like ways.
Yeah, I think they only labeled it down to the seventh generation,
Yeah, yeah. When it's way longer.
but I think they're just trying to make a point that it's going to you what you do here is going to affect your kids on into the as far as you can trace your lineage. What you do will affect.
Yeah,
And so especially if it's not confronted. And in society, because we have so many little ideas and things connected that are important, things begin to get really mixed up and confused. But the kinds of things that we're talking about, everybody believes those things. Everybody holds the same things important, and because of that, there's not much conflict about it, and also not a lot of investigation. But in fact, this is what, if you could think of it, is what the spiritual life is all about: is to let us say somehow finish off that original sin or get out of the habits that we were taught as childhood.
hmm,
Uh, there is actually in the Bible a very important story that I actually picked up this story from, guess who? Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, because he was into all the religions. And that he also read some Bible without any Christian background,
yeah,
just reading it as raw text, and also coming from a long history of suttas. And so when he read the story of Adam and Eve, it was fairly easy for him to pick up on exactly what was going on in that story, which is precisely what we're talking about here. So, the Christians, when they read the story, because they've been Christianized and take it from a point of view of what's important and all of that, like this is the Bible and this is God's word, so this is all about God um, and
the rabbit
magic and
hole.
all of that, right? And so They get very much wrapped up in the belief of the story itself rather than the moral of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the story itself has talking snakes, and the woman did it. It's all the female's fault, and it was an apple, and God threw us out of paradise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if we look at it, what was it that they actually ate was fruit. But
Mm-hmm.
in this sense, in the Pali, it's used often. In the scriptures, it's used often. Even in our language, we use it often, like fruit of the loom. What is fruit of the loom?
Um, I oh man, is that like the ripe fruit?
No, the fruit of the loom. Okay, here's an easy one. What is fruit of the loins?
Oh, I see.
Okay. What
True,
is
right?
the fruit of one's labor?
Their results.
All right,
Mm,
precisely. So the fruit of the loom is not just underwear, but fruit of the loom is in fact anything that the loom produces.
okay.
Okay? The fruit then is the fruit of that they ate was then the result of some actions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where all the Christians miss the definition of the word fruit,
Yeah, yeah.
because we're talking about the fruit of one's actions. Now, what was the action that they had? They
Well, they.
had they had knowledge of good and evil, or good and bad, or yes and no, or up and down. And that knowledge, actually, from what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is talking about, this knowledge is actually a knowledge of feeling.
A feeling. Interesting.
Yes, the knowledge of the feeling of I like it
Hmm.
means the feeling of I want it.
Yeah, yeah.
And if I have the feeling I like it and the feeling of I want it, that means that I have the feeling also that it must be good, it must be valuable, it must be worthwhile because it's desirable to me,
Yeah.
therefore it is desirable, period.
Hmm.
Okay? The other side of that is I don't like it. I don't like it means I don't want it. I don't want it to be around me. I don't want it here. Therefore, the next step is it must be bad. This is the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah, it's in that regard, that would be that's almost like the background of our life. It's the karma machine in that sense.
That's the that in fact, if you think about it, then is part of the original sin that we get from our fathers and our parents, that they go around judging things as this is important, this is not important, this is good, this is bad, and we pick that disease up as a child.
And that's all rooted in guilt because that's how I feel about it.
All right, that's one of the bad feelings that can come out of this system.
Yeah.
So, the knowledge of good and evil means that we are living in a paradise, but we go around judging that paradise as this part of the paradise I like and that part of the paradise I don't like.
Mhm.
By taking, like this tree here, I live in a paradise, but this tree here, it's got a leaf. So that means this tree is not perfect. I should dig up this tree and burn it.
Yeah.
But if I do that with every tree here, judge that tree as to good or bad based upon some arbitrary criteria, then I'll wind up destroying my paradise.
Yeah, and it's almost like a counterintuitive because people always think it's either or. It can't just be like how it is. It always has to be like this way or that way.
Well, in a way, it is, in the sense that if you have things good or bad, that's like flipping the switch good, bad, good, bad. But then there's a higher thing that we're talking about here, and that is, are you going to apply that switch or not? Yes, I'm
Yeah.
going to apply it. No, I'm not. Yes, I do. No, I don't. If we get into the to the part of I don't apply the switch anymore, then uh, things are just uh, as they are. And so this idea then of beauty is in the mind of the beholder, importance is in the mind of the beholder, good is in the mind of the beholder, and bad is in the mind of the beholder. This is all mind created stuff. And in
Yeah.
that regard, we don't live in the real world. We live in a mentally constructed world that has all of these very subtle uh, qualities added to something, including the idea of important. Because if things are important enough, then they raise to the level of problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Enough to hurt others. Or, like in that sense, like it's important enough to like hurt other people. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it gets
Exactly.
there. Yeah.
If we change our frame of reference from good and bad, important or not important, beautiful or ugly, if we change our frame of reference to dukkha, dukkha nirodha, then that change of reference is remarkable because we recognize then that making judgments is often dukkha. It's dissatisfying to go around making judgments. I like this, I don't like that.
But in a way, that's deeper than just verbal thinking. That's like physiological stress, like pressure, literally.
Hmm. Well, you see, the human being, through our ignorance, thought that if we went around judging things as good or bad, that we would be able to build a paradise.
Yeah.
But we built instead is cities and technology and jet planes that pollute the air. And in the process of us building our human paradise, we've actually destroyed the paradise that we had in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. I mean, it's like when you're telling yourself you got something new and you're saying, I'm not gonna break it, I'm not gonna break it, I'm not gonna break it, and then you drop it and you break it. It's like that.
Uh huh. That gives rise to this question: how many items can you carry in one hand without
Um,
dropping one?
for me, about two, maybe three, depending on what it is.
I would go for zero. If you put one thing in your hand and you go mindfulness out the door, if you forget what you're doing, then you'll drop it.
Yeah.
An interesting thing like that, in fact, is take your little pinky finger and put your shoe on it. Yeah, take the pinky finger and hang your shoe so that the shoe is just hanging on by that pinky finger. You're holding up
Wait.
the back of the shoe, the inside of the shoe. You put your foot in here, and so the heel of the shoe, the top part of it that's up at the ankle, the
Mm-hmm.
easiest way to hold the shoe with one finger.
Okay.
All right?
Uh-huh.
And do that as a meditation and figure out how long you can hold that shoe because you will drop it. In fact, that one technique has been used for people for meditation or to take a nap or whatever. As soon as the shoe falls, it's time to wake up because you lost your mindfulness when the shoe fell.
But won't, won't that physically hurt? Like in the sense of how long can you hold it?
Uh huh. Well, how see the thing of it is that holding it with the pinky finger is the weakest finger. Shoes are fairly heavy.
Mm.
They will it'll slip off, or the you see if you hold the finger up, then the shoe is going to be there. But if the finger relaxes under the weight of the shoe, it's going to fall off.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. It's a balancing act.
It's right. And the question is, can you be mindful to hold that shoe? That's one of the many little games that can be played with our hands, opening and closing the hands. But let's go back and talk about something that you originally were referring to, because this is what's all been going around. Um, Rather than working on mindfulness directly for the moment, let's work with, or play with, in fact, memory.
Okay.
Because memory is not what we think it is. Here's a really, really clear example of it. Over the years, laptops have grown in memory and capacity. Most specifically, how much data it can hold has to do with how big the hard drive is. So we can have a kind of a loose analogy about human memory. And a lot of human memory is actually stored in the cerebellum. And the cerebellum on the human, which is right at the back, it's right in the back part here. You can see it on the images of YouTube for brain and whatnot like that. Uh, this is the source where most memories are stored, and that the memories are stored along with the feelings. So when we record a feeling, we record not something that is, let us say, a, only a piece of the thing. Like, for instance, with television, we only have the sound and we only have the image or the picture. They experimented with smell-o-vision, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And it never did because well, it didn't work because they didn't put the money in it. I imagine that they could have done something like a 3D image printer that had various chemicals in it that they could actually create synthetic molecules that we could um, detect as a particular smell. But that's not the point. The point is that when we store a memory, we store only parts of it, but there is stuff that is stored that you wouldn't think of it as stored. For instance, in television, we store only the image and the sound because that's all the input we get from a TV. However, in life situations, we normally are more likely to store special or important things, and the special and the important things have to do with what's special and important to me. So we will remember injuries. We will remember accidents. We will remember when that bully attacked. We will remember when we got chewed out in front of the class. We will remember when we fell down on stage.
Hmm.
Those kind of things, the things that we find out are remembered to be important to us, normally is associated with things that were threatening to the self. That is associated with the self-preservation instinct. So what I'm saying is that most memory has not just a visual or a hearing component to it, it'll have a feeling component with it also.
Hmm.
And not only that, but the worst of it is that um, children especially, but even in adults, we don't spend all of our time in suffering and sorrow and upsetness. We have, in fact, whole industries that can help us come out of our own misery. This is called the entertainment industry. They want to entertain us,
Yeah.
which means that we get out of ourself and into whatever they're doing. But we almost always take ourselves into it with us. And so, in that regard, then we don't really quite enjoy it. Uh, an example of that is that we can't just enjoy a football team or a football game. We have to choose sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so that's another one. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Choosing sides is in the eye of the beholder. And the football game is just a football game. Most people don't care about the outcome. In fact, there's one group of people who really, really don't care about the outcome. What they care about is having more games played, and that is the vendors, the stadium owners, the team owners. The team owner doesn't care whether his team wins or loses this game. He cares about the money he makes off the team. And so that's where he's all plotting and everything. He's not there out on the field carrying footballs. He's in some office trying to get advertisements and stuff going. So you see, um, everybody's got their own idea of what's important.
Yeah. Like you said once, like I said, it's all relative, and you were like, no, it's all delusion. Which is very true. It's very
Mm-hmm.
true.
So, in this regard, our memories are selective based upon what we thought in that moment was important, what impressed us,
Mhm.
what really contacted us. All right. And so in Paticca Samuppada, there is that thing called pasa, contact. And that contact has a kind of a secondary loop down into the sankara in the sense that when things impact you, it impacts you enough for it to be remembered. That's part of our memory system. Things that impact us very, very lightly, that don't cause any feelings at all, we don't tend to remember that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? Think about your third grade, the time when you were about 8 years old or so. All right? Do you remember the teacher's name?
Oh yeah, I do. I do remember her name.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, let's go for it. Do you remember where in the room you sat?
Yeah, to the right.
Okay. Do you remember all of the various books that you used in that class, the textbooks?
No, of course not.
Okay. Do
No.
you remember any of the artwork?
Just a map, but that's it.
Okay. Do you remember any grades that you got? Any papers that she returned to you?
Not like by memory, no. I know I got it, but I don't remember like
Okay.
image. Yeah.
All right. So while I'm asking you these questions, how do you feel now?
Not much. Kind of just humor, because I remember some funny things. But I guess
Okay.
that's the feeling, right? The feeling of some humor.
Right, that when we bring up when I'm asking you these questions about what happened there, the feelings that you had will also arise. Like when I remember one piece of art that I did and that
Yeah.
I really liked it. And so when I think of that piece of art, I remember feeling really good. Um, I remember in the second grade that I got an outstanding on a particular test. It, for me, that was higher than an A. I guess for the teacher, it was pass or fail, but for me, it was an outstanding.
And it's funny because it makes a point because of the main thing I remember from third grade was that she made a girl cry because she was yelling at her. And she yelled at me. And it was a whole big deal between parents and teacher. And but out of the whole year, I don't remember anyone's face, but I remember that moment. Yeah.
Ah, so now you're proving what I was telling you about.
Yeah. Uh,
And that is when we become threatened, then that's what we will most likely remember in vivid detail.
yeah. I mean, yeah.
And then we will play that over and over again, that deeply ingrained memory. And every time we play it, we wind up with those same feelings.
Yeah, and then it comes to why me. Oh, this has always been the case. That's what the mind would say.
Uh-huh. But then later we can even forget that episode or not think about that episode, but still the feelings will be there.
Hmm.
And so this is an important part of feelings is that we do store our feelings. We store that because things impact us.
Yeah, when it comes to, um, that's why I would think memory is selective. Memory is selective. It's not like people think where it's like it's a chamber that I can just reach in and grab whatever memory I
Okay.
want.
I would say rather than calling it selective, I would call it quantum.
Why why do you say that?
Well, you know that the quantum properties of light.
Hmm.
You know you know that a photon to get kicked out of its orbit has to have a certain amount of energy.
Hmm. Okay.
Okay. So if you've got a really big nucleus, like a uranium atom, then you're going to have many, many valences of electrons. For one of those electrons in a mid valence to come up to the higher valence, to come up to an orbit that's further away, requires energy. It requires so much energy. It requires a packet of energy or a unit of energy, and this is what we mean by quantum. Basically, what we're saying is even though the whole world appears to be analog, it's actually digital, right down to the subparticle level.
Yeah. It's I know I see what you're saying.
All right. And so basically, if you have a light beam coming, the power of that light beam does not dissipate over time, that each photon carries the same packet of energy that it left with, except that in space, because we live in a three-dimensional space-time continuum, each one of those photons in that ray are going to become dispersed further and further out in space. That is actually, then how can we gather that light together again is with a large lens like a telephoto lens or maybe even on a telescope that can take that diverse rays to get a whole bunch of those packets back together and focus it so that you can see a star that you couldn't see with the naked eye because the photons were too far apart to register anywhere. That it's actually possible for a star to be so far away that to be able to detect it would require a telescope the size of our entire solar system.
Oh my gosh.
Why?
This
Because the photons get that
wow.
separated. They get dispersed through
That's yeah, like
space.
the universe is expanding, and then if you go really back into the universe, there's almost nothing.
Well, let's not go theoretical on it. Let's just stay with what we understand about quantums.
Okay, okay.
Okay, we can also think about a quantum as a threshold to a door. In other words, I've got to lift my foot high enough to go into the room because the levels of the floor are different. And if I don't raise my foot high enough, I'm going to trip and fall. If I raise it high enough, it doesn't matter if I raise it too high or not, but I do have to get it up to a certain level to make that next step. Or just coming upstairs. Every stair is a quantum. You can't go to here and get on that stair. You got to go all the way up, right?
Yeah.
Our memories are like that too. In fact, the whole brain is set up that way. We even in neurophysics we talk about neurons firing.
Mhm.
That's a quantum. It
Yeah,
fires
yeah. I was about to
and
say
it
they send
fires.
packets. Yeah.
Okay, which means that if anything's going to get stored as a memory, it has to have a certain kick to it. It has to have a certain quantum of energy. It has to have a certain force of contact. And if things don't get up to that force of contact, then you won't get it. So an example of that would be that you're driving in the mountains in the car, and there's an outlet, a scenic stop place, and you come out and you stand there, and it looks nice, but you've seen these kind of things before, as opposed to you stand there and you get a sense of awe about, oh, how beautiful this place is, and you begin to allow it to contact you. The likelihood of you remembering that moment is very high.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that scenic thing. Another one would be a sunset. That we tend to remember sunsets because we tend to get a sense of awe. In other words, it actually we allow it to impact us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a major quality of memory, is this quantum quality to it, that it's got to get up to a level to contact us. It's even more complicated than that.
I
In
bet.
fact, in the sense that there's a lot of stuff happening that we don't know about.
Yeah. I mean,
We don't
that's
have
what you
the
said.
sensory input the way that the dogs do.
Yeah.
Or a field of flowers can be harvested by bees that we can't get the nectar. Humans can't do it. We'll destroy the field of flowers, but we won't get much nectar. But the bees will get it all. Why? Because they have the ability to see ultraviolet rays. And so the flowers actually change color when they've been harvested. And so the bee doesn't have to look at inside each pistil to see if it's got nectar in it or not. He can look out there and see which flowers need to be harvested
Yeah.
because they have a kind of eyesight that we don't have. Dogs have smell we don't have. There's just so many things that humans do not have the ability to do, but what we do have is the ability to invent. And one of the things that we have invented is night vision goggles.
Hmm.
Okay, so that means that now we have the ability to see at night with this technology that we originally didn't have. And then you and I can talk with we were sitting in the same room with each other, but look, now we've got technology and we can be across the world from each other.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing that we've got this kind of technology? But all it does is that it improves our own senses.
Yeah.
But that's all it does. It just gives us more input with the senses that we have.
But like what like that's the whole I mean maybe this is trailing off, but like on the sense of what why we do these practices is to transform in the sense like our even our chemistry, like our body chemistry, so that our perception, that our senses are like more intensified, so that we would feel like you would say like our proprioceptive nervous system would open up.
Precisely. That's because the level of attention or mindfulness, that investigation itself brings a new intensity that may reach that threshold so that we actually the information records. That's another quantum that we should look at, and that is that not only is there a quantum of contact that's needed to register this as memory, but there's also a lower level of quantum that is required to have this register at all. In other words, a lot of stuff is subconscious because the way that we operate, especially if we favor one sense over all of the others.
Yeah, like thinking.
Okay, like thinking. All right. So, if we are not thinking and something happens, then we can be there for it. But if we are thinking and something happens, it may be a great big surprise to us. This is my favorite story in that regard. is that we live on an island. We have really stormy weather from time to time. And there was one point when there was lightning. I don't know how close it was. I don't know what it struck, but the lightning was bright enough that everything was brightened up. You couldn't say that all the lightning was over there. You couldn't say it was over there. It was
Yeah,
just
yeah.
bright everywhere. So it was pretty close by. Immediately followed by a clap of thunder that everybody in the house came about 3 feet off the ground.
Wow.
It was enormous, okay? But the thing that I found so amusing was is that I didn't have a startle reaction for it.
That's
Everybody else,
impressive.
you're right, they didn't no startle reaction. Well, I knew that it was happening. You see, I was out on the porch here. Everybody else was
Jeez.
in the house. I saw the lightning. The immediate following of thunder was a known thing.
Well, yeah, but it's like you have to be mentally there enough to not react to it. And that's
Exactly.
okay, that's really fast. That's not normal. It's like in the sense of like because sometimes we're like struggling to even like realize that you're walking, you know. Like, you're hey, hello, like sometimes we daydream and we'll realize, oh my God, wait, I'm right here, you
Mm,
know. You know.
exactly so. Um, so uh, if we have this lower level of quantum, that means that ordinary things that we used to completely ignore, we now are paying attention to. We're letting them into our field of input.
Hmm.
Okay, and that the Goenka technique of scanning the body has an enormous benefit.
Okay.
I'm not sure that the cost was worth it. All of those hours of doing the scanning meditation over the course of many months, I'm not sure that the cost benefit ratio was there, but I do have a long term lingering benefit from that practice. And
Okay.
that is that I'm alive to the body. The body
Yeah.
is alive. I know it. I can feel it. I can feel it almost all over.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is, and then it's quite sensual. The human body is really sensual in the sense that we've got the proprioceptive system, we've got the touch, and all of the senses become kind of vibrantly alive. But basically, what's going on is that our threshold for that quantum has been lowered because we're not spending a lot of time thinking. So that means that we spend much more time in the senses, in our sensory awareness.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
But
we
we
do.
kind of forget that. In fact, that's what makes childhood really so magnificent is the child is literally in the body most of the time. And our schools teach us to go out of our body into our head.
But it's also like even the body itself, because like when puberty hits, all the hormones and then the impulses, like in the sense of like the disturbance of emotion in general, like just to have emotion in general.
Right. And so when we're having emotions, we don't pay attention to them.
Yeah.
That in fact, a lot of what these bodily chemistry changes are all about, it's an informational system.
Hmm.
And that when we're doing a lot of thinking and not paying attention to the body, that means that we're basically not tuned into the right channel. And so we're going to miss things. This would be possibly one of the reasons for the cause of cancer, is that people are not aware of what they're doing. Uh, Other things would be, um, say, when the child is little, we spend a lot of time in the body. We frolic, we play, we dance, we're all over the place. But
Yeah.
when we get into school, we get more and more into the head, into knowledgeable stuff, and then we're not paying attention to the body. So when things like anxiety come, the question is, at what level does that anxiety have to get up to before we're willing to recognize it?
That's the funny part because it's inseparable from your experience. So if you're not recognizing it, it only will hurt more.
Exactly so. Which this is where then Paticca Samuppada really starts to come into play when we understand that all this anxiety that's building up and that is going to have to reach a certain quantum before it gets my attention, and that it's actually possible for it to stay under my level of awareness and still direct my behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly like if it's like people say, if if you've ever been to church, you'll always hear the question, how far is too far? Which is it's a sign of the total unconsciousness of a human. Like we can be so unconscious of our own like suffering that we're willing to like go to the threshold of what even like like we love suffering, like in the sense where we're almost deluded into like a sense of gratitude or like gratuitousness for it.
That's really delusional when we think that there is some advantage to suffering.
Well, that's our problem all the time, in the sense of like whenever we break, let's just say in the not in a moralistic sense, but this is the only way I can term it. Whenever you kind of fall out of right view, it's like, well, that's why, because you're in your sensuality in the sense of greed.
Hmm.
Like,
That's
yeah.
right. So um, we not aware of that anxiety, we will go around doing things. But when we become aware to it, let us say through anapanasati, that we start noticing the body. We start watching what happens to the body when we're breathing deep. That in fact, the deep breathing is one of the things that will help people to see the anxiety that was already there that they weren't seeing before. That normally what we work with is we work first with the thoughts and then with the feelings. But very quickly, those feelings will become manifest because we're actually paying attention to the body and the feelings work together because
Mm.
that's where all the chemistry goes on. The adrenaline and all of that kind of blood chemistry changes, all kinds of things happen in the body that we're not aware of until we start paying attention intentionally. And when we do, now we can see that anxiety, we can begin to play with it as a toy to recognize that the anxiety, first off, it too is temporary. It too arises and comes down, up and down, and that if we allow it to be there, it will influence our behavior. That in fact, all of this anxiety is part of the past sankharas that influence our perception, so that the internal image that we make that doesn't have any anxiety in it. Let's just say that you're looking, that you're standing um, on a precipice, or let us just say in a tall building, Empire State Building. Empire State Building, but in the old days, all they had was a guardrail. Okay,
Mhm.
but that guardrail is enough to um, protect one. And then, unless someone really wants to get over the guardrail, now they've got glass up, so that you can't. But in the old days, they had a guardrail. People would go up to that guardrail and look down. When you stand at that guardrail and look down, what happens?
This well, for me, I get this like electric feeling of like, oh.
All right, but what is that? Is that also coming with the imagination of going over the side?
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, like the fear
Well,
falling.
guess what? That guardrail in that tall building did not have this you going over the side. That was all mentally done, including the consciousness and the anxiety and all of that. And some people have tingly feet.
Yeah, yeah, I get
Okay.
like uh kind of like a rush, like whoa, oh my God.
Uh-huh. Well, some people really, really like that. That's why
Yeah,
we have skydiving and bungee jumping and that kind of
yeah,
thing.
that's why I
But
want to
the
try.
point is that you imagine going over the side.
Hmm. Yeah,
You're mentally constructing that. And then that's what you're responding to is the mentally construction that you have done that in fact you don't and you didn't have any intention to actually go over the side.
yeah, it's like just anxiety for just the sake of the possibility of falling, which
Hmm.
is kind of like not useful.
It's not. It's
Yeah,
not at all, especially when we also not only do we imagine the falling when we're standing at that ledge or at that guardrail, many times we go around imagining the guardrail and the tall building and the precipice, and then we imagine going over the side. All of it is mentally constructed. And then it doesn't have to even be a guardrail. Now we can imagine something else and have that same feeling of anxiety.
yeah,
In fact, we don't even know sometimes what it is that we imagine that kicks off the anxiety. That sometimes, in fact, it takes very little or nothing at all in the form of thought that will kick off anxiety, especially when there are so many people in the West who are actually in the habit of feeling anxious.
yeah, yeah. It's almost like
Just to
like
think of going to school will create anxiety in many people.
yeah, yeah, and I wouldn't say rightly so because they don't know better, you know. I wouldn't say
This
rightly
is
so.
what anapanasati is all about is that we can do a complete investigation and the outcome of that investigation is we know a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't blame people for not knowing because, in the sense like
Well,
you
we all
can't
started out that way. We all were raised
exactly.
in
Yeah,
this culture, this original sin.
yeah, because I used to have well, I still sometimes do like have a real big anger issue towards society in the sense of like who cares about it? Like, as a young person, it's like society is the enemy of life and
It
and
is
happiness.
absolutely. But the
But like
problem
in
is that
yeah.
when you have to understand the distinction between the society
Hmm.
and the people in the society. Because
Yeah.
often when we hate the society, we wind up hating individuals who were caught in that society just like we are.
Yeah, and that's the whole um thing
Believe
because
me,
like in
for some people, it's really hard to have compassion for Donald Trump.
yeah, I mean,
And look
you
how
know,
he is just stuck into it.
I know it's almost like unbelievable. It's truly unbelievable. I mean, it's like, but I can't say that because I can look back at myself and think, whoa, unbelievable. I was
Uh,
so unbelievable, whatever that
mhm.
means, because
Well,
anyone can do anything. You know?
right, because of our own mentally constructed stuff and
Mhm.
the way that it impacts us, and that the mentally constructed stuff that we construct now is also then going to be the basis for next time when we mentally construct stuff. And this is why it's a habit. But not only that, but it tends to get worse.
Yeah.
It tends to build up. It tends to have things that are important become more important and more important.
Hmm. To the point of
And
the existential crisis.
right, exactly, to where there's no existential. So why have a crisis over it?
Because that's the whole thing. It's like you were taught for the unimportant, there's supposed to be an existential. But the existential is that there is none.
Yeah, the really existential is there's no existential.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the yeah.
And spending all of our time thinking that truth was important.
Yeah. And well, exactly. And that's another thing. It's like,
And I'm talking about it with a capital T now.
yeah, because that's if because for me it's like in my life it was like I wouldn't say it was the worst, but like, some people really enjoy life, like they like to be social and in the sense of like, like they like to really, do everything. Like I at an early age was like very like, no, I'm already done with this crap. Like this is too much for me. And then but the last thing that was left was the truth. Because that's what how they say in India, if you can't get a job, just be a sadhu. Like in the sense of like y-
We've
that's
got
how the,
something like that in the West too. If you can't, those who can't teach, those who can do, and those who can't teach. You've
yeah,
heard that.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's funny. It's also like again ups backwards.
Precisely. That's exactly right. All right. So, um, what we begin to do then is we recognize that this quality of importance, if nothing is important, then that means that there's nothing to do. The whole quality of importance is that it needs care. It needs fixing. But when nothing is important anymore, then you can just relax. We take take it off the heat, take the power out from under it.
Yeah,
And how
and
we
that
do that lowering the heat is by bringing up our awareness. So when sati is there, when mindfulness is there, when investigation is there, we can see things before they get big enough and hot enough, or let us say, it's kind of like a light bulb turning on. If you've already got 5 or 6 lights in your room already burning, then one more light turning on is not going to register. So the more lights you turn off, and in fact, you've got it down to there's no lights in the room, and now you turn one on, boy, do you know it.
yeah,
And so that main light, though, that we need to turn to dim down is the one about the thinking. That is basically all about here now is also the way of getting out of the head into the reality of the moment. To be here now means to be in your sensual awareness. That's how we experience the here now. How do we experience the past and the future is through constructed memory in the head.
and that's so against the Western mindset of like you have to go through these psychological barriers first, in that
The
sense. Like,
psychological barriers are not we fall actually Buddhists fall into the trap of deeply buried psychological things, right?
mhm, yeah,
Even when we look at the idea of the fetters as opposed to the hindrances,
mhm,
we recognize it from that. Except that we never do really have to deal with the deep stuff. The only thing that we need to do is to deal with the hindrances. Imagine it's like this, that there is a plant, a weed, a really gross, undesirable weed, but we can't uproot it, but we can cut it off when it starts to grow. So as soon as it starts to grow, As soon as it gets above ground, in other words, as soon as the underlying fetter of uh, fear manifests itself in the moment as anxiety, we can cut that off. If we keep cutting it off, if we cut that plant off every time it shows a leaf, you cut every leaf off over and over and over again, guess what's going to happen to the roots?
Yeah, it's it'll die.
Exactly. Exactly. And so if we've got a whole park full of leaves that need to be trimmed, we've got quite a job. But if we can sit down and start looking at one leaf at a time that grows in the mind, and we can cut that off and cut that off and keep cutting it off, then we don't have to worry about all of those leaves on all of those plants. We only need to worry about, and in fact, worry is not the word to use anymore. So people think about, oh, all of these leaves on all of these weeds and in my mind, and it's just so much, and it's all so important and everything. Wrong attitude. That's the attitude of the loser. The attitude of the winner is that if you grow, I'm going to cut you off.
Yeah, because as I like over the years, I always wondered, like, man, am I just creating issues? Like now I know I am, but like
Now
when
you
back,
know
yeah,
it.
like back then, like when I was like, quote unquote, like depressed and all these different issues, it's like now, like if that was really who I was, then why don't I feel that now? And that's very obvious in the sense of like, but it's like, yeah, like you say, that's the world we live in and the one that makes contact with us. So, you know,
Well, you can see that the reason that you created the issues was because you saw things important.
oh
That
yeah,
now you recognize that, hey, that wasn't important at all. There was nothing to that.
which is, I guess, like the hardest part about it, I guess, for me, if there was a difficulty, is like spiritual, like highlights. Like, wow, this is what made me get into meditation. Remember that
Mm.
moment? Like, make sure you remember that because that's the most intense one. And like, and in a sense, like now I don't like do it as much, but I used to do like that was my drive for my practice to get to that moment again, to see that, like whatever I saw or whatever you want to call it in that sense, like whatever experience. But over time, it's like the more experience, the more it starts to become a burden.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, all of those things that we created back then, um, those issues that we were talking about, was because we thought something was important. And the answer is yes, there was something important. Me. All of those issues that everybody creates has to do with self-preservation or the self. I'm important here, and I've got to make plans so that everything works out for me. So when we actually mature in the Dhamma, we wind up having, it's the Dhamma that's important, or it's the dukkha nirodha quality that's important. To be out of suffering, which means to be out of selfishness. So we change the point of importance. We wind up with only one thing that's important, or only one rule to keep. And the best part of then is that if I'm not important anymore, then that means that I can now be of value to others.
Yeah, that's the whole funny part about it. It's a whole a big joke. Like
Uh-huh.
it's all upside down in the sense like you thought by attention to you had value, but nope.
Hmm. But the individual has no value. That
Hmm.
in fact, the warlords and the genocidal maniacs are all correct in one point, and that is that it's okay if all those people die. That's in fact what the Trump administration is talking about. Is that and also big industry like Charles Koch has been accused of. Well, let the coronavirus kill all of those old people. Why should we have to take care of them? Give them Social Security. Let them die, and the economy will be better. Okay, so what they're actually pointing to is uh, each individual person there is not really important. Well, especially not to Charles Koch. They're not important to him. But what he's failing to understand is that those people that he would like to have die from the coronavirus do see themselves as important, and that they will suffer greatly when they find their own illness. Not only that, but the family members think that that person who is sick with coronavirus is important, and they'll go through the grieving process. But if you have a mature relationship, say with your mom, a really mature relationship, and you can see where she is, you know what's happening, and when she dies, it's not important anymore.
Yeah,
And she
because but
died, yeah, well,
yeah, that's true, right? Like I've said that to people before, and they're not just about my mom, but just about everybody. Like in the sense of like, it's not pessimistic. It's only pessimistic if you think it's important, if you value it. Like,
exactly.
yes, it's like, but it's like, I think people, again, it's like that really deep belief in unconditional love. That really, because if you don't love, if you don't think it's important, you're cold-hearted, you're a bitter, you're a demon, basically.
I, I,
Things like that. All the names.
again, it's all upside down.
Hmm. Yes.
Uh, you used it correctly when you talked about love being important. That you should love people, right? That's
Yeah,
the
you
way that the
should.
Christians
Yeah.
teach it. Yeah, I insist that you love people. Well, if you look at the way that love works or the way that it's used commonly, it has to do with greed,
Mhm.
not and selfishness. So the loved object becomes important because it's important to me.
Yeah.
So if the young man wants to marry the girl, he says, "Won't you be mine?" Or "Won't you marry me?"
Hmm.
Okay? Be my girlfriend, be mine. That's the whole idea of desire. Girls want to be desirable, and then they don't like it when they're desired by the wrong guy. But the whole idea then is I'm important, and love becomes part of that importance. However, when we drop the importance and drop selfishness, we become altruistic. We recognize, look at how much suffering these people have with all of their important ideas. Let's see if we can help them understand things better with the Dhamma so that they don't do so much suffering with all of this importance. And so that's
Yeah.
where real compassion comes in. But we don't do it in the sense of thou shalt not, but rather in and making more rules, but rather in the sense of lighten up, enjoy yourself, look at what you're doing.
Yeah. 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 It's
And so love becomes backwards, that in fact love creates and causes suffering.
that's the whole, because in that sense you will end up seeing that this person is not fulfilling you eventually. I mean, like in that sense of like what you thought to be fulfillment, like in the sense of love or whatever, or
Mm-hmm.
some idealized version of love fueled by, desire, by libido or whatever Freudian term, the libido,
Uh-huh.
the impulse. Yeah. Yeah. And but I mean, I learned that too when I first got into a relationship, and then it took a while to like get over it, but like I realized eventually that, oh my God, it was just love didn't exist because of her. It was, I just loved her like I did. I did.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I say it like that. I did. I love her. That's
and you loved her and you didn't get what you wanted from her, and so that love was suffering. It was suffering when you loved her, and it was suffering to get over the love.
Yeah, and that was like a big step in my understanding of like, well, what is happiness then if that's not it? Because that's like the ultimate hype of this culture is like the relationship.
Really is. Well, that's because it can be exploited for business.
Yep, pretty much.
I
And it
mean,
is a
what
yeah.
are their choices? They're either going to do nothing more than sell a few rugs and a few Zen cushions. Is about the best they're going to do, maybe a book or two. Or on the other side, they can sell cosmetics, they can sell furniture, they can sell clothing, they can sell shoes, they can sell medical procedures,
Yeah. And this is all fueled by
they can sell sports, they can sell sports equipment, they can sell train out diets. Look at the industries that are associated with love.
yeah, because love is forever, right? Just like karma.
Well, here comes the gears. They wanted what are they going to do with all those diamonds they were digging up out of South America, or excuse me, South Africa, and then they came on to that. That was a very, very big sales pitch back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Diamond rings did not exist in 1920. And now listen to all the songs and all of that, music and all of that kind of stuff. Diamonds are forever. No, they're just rocks, hard rocks.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
what makes them expensive is because they're sold in jewelry stores and they have been attached to the word love.
yeah, wedding rings and all.
A
Yeah.
wedding ring, a diamond ring, exactly.
It's so
Diamonds are a
weird.
girlfriend's.
I never understood none of that as a young kid. I always like just saw it as a big act. Like just it's a
Kids can
show.
see it. That's the whole
Yeah.
point is the kids can see this ridiculousness that the adults are doing.
Yeah.
And then we get eventually conned into it. We get
Yeah.
propagandized into believing it all.
Wow. Thank God for stubbornness. You know, for real, because I did not
Yeah,
give in.
in a way, all of these years that I've been learning the Dhamma, when I get down to it and fully understand it and really take great joy in it, I can reflect upon, but I knew all of that when I was 3 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
That the
Like,
Dhamma is actually an unlearning process so that we can get back to our childhood and
yeah.
enjoy our life.
That's it's like funny because that's like usually put into as a metaphorical story. Like that's your spirit. No, that is the journey. That is literally the process. Like it is that. It's not just like a feel good. Like that's how it is. No, that's literally what you're doing. You're resetting. You're refresh, clicking the reset.
Well, they talk about it as a joke about the old people who are in their what they call second childhood,
Yeah.
but those are the ones who finally woke up.
Yeah. If yeah, I know
They
you.
finally woke up. Hey, I don't have to be an old man anymore and follow along what culture and society wants. I can go back and be a child again.
Well, I mean, I wish, but most people don't do that. Most people kind of stay in the. It's like anything but talking about basically your real life. Anything but that, please. Like that's the attitude that most people have.
They get wrapped up in the rules. You got to do this in order to get that. You got to do this in order to get that. That old law of karma.
Yeah, and
If you do
if
good, you'll get good results. If you do bad, you'll get bad results. And the Buddha was the only one that could see that that's only true in the cause effect relationship. If you do something good now, you'll get the benefit immediately. If you do bad, you'll get the benefit of that immediately.
yeah, and then the effect of now, here and now, like right
Mhm.
now, what I'm doing.
But our whole society has lied to us. They said, learn your ABCs and you'll be better off. You'll get a reward. Learn your alphabet. Learn to read. Learn your one, two, threes, and you'll get the reward. You know what the reward is? Another year of school. And what's the reward for that? A
So
graduation?
I, it's crazy because everybody at the graduation, at my graduation, no kid thought it was important. It was just for the parents, like, hey, like, let's give them a show
Well,
here.
isn't that funny? Right, exactly. The kids, they can see, they
Yeah.
recognize, what's the point of all of this? It's the parents that have dropped into the delusion that the almighty dollar is, in fact, what is almighty.
Yeah, but if you admit, see, that's the thing. Like, maybe, I think you know this because you lived in Western society for a while, but like, it's almost a sin to admit that because then you're selfish and being selfish is wrong instead of just misunderstanding. Like, it's just misunderstanding. It's not, you're not wrong. No one's wrong for
Right
feeling.
and
And
wrong, good and bad, rather than look at what you're doing. Exactly. They
yeah,
get
it's,
caught back into that the fruit of uh, judging, and so they destroy their own paradise. And so they decide that, hey, you can't have a paradise. You've got to destroy yours like we did ours, because that justifies that we did the right thing by destroying our paradise.
yeah, and it because then as a kid I did the like I took it on myself to if you're gonna destroy me, I'm gonna destroy myself. That was my attitude because I thought like like I'll have the last word in that sense. Like
Still, the self is so important.
yeah, it's it you know it's weird because I guess since now we can like I kind of want to ask another question that might be appropriate or not, and if you want to answer you could or not.
Well,
Is
we're
that a
getting a little long in the hour now, and why don't we let that question wait for next time? But give us a prelude. What's the question? And we'll do it next time.
I think it was kind of like a kind of fun question. It wasn't really like super serious.
Oh,
It
those are
was,
the best kind.
yeah, I mean, in the sense of fun because
If
I've
it's
never had,
serious, it must be important.
yeah, yeah, like I just kind of had this experience my whole life, like as from young kid to adult now. Um, and I kind of asked different spiritual circles, like, what is this? Like, and I never really got a satisfying answer. And I think it happens to everybody, and it does on some level. They call it deja vu. And I'm bringing this up because you talked about causality and things like that. And I
Mhm.
was like, kind of like for me though, I dream up the future. Like I hate to say it this way, but this is how the only way I could explain what happens is like I'll dream the future, and then when the moment arises in real time, I'll be like, oh my God, dreamed this, and I'll remember it in real time. I won't remember it when I dreamed it. Like I won't know the day I wake up, but I'll know I dreamed it in my dreams.
Mhm.
And some people call it deja vu because people get feelings. I get the image, the flashback, the memory, literally a vivid image of like, I dreamed this. I was dreaming this.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, let's answer that question next time. It took quite a while just to get it straight, and it's going to take a while to talk about it. But in a way, we already have been. We're talking about constructed memory.
Yes, exactly. But that's the
Okay.
future. I mean, in the sense of future, that's the future, you know.
All right. So when the event actually happens, then it's not necessarily a big deal.
Hmm.
But what is important is that sense or that feeling of recognition in a surprising kind of way. Because I've had deja vu experiences. And when I tried to work with them, I tried to keep the reality of this moment in line with my deja vu,
Okay.
recognizing that it didn't. Reality wouldn't keep going the way that I wanted to construct it.
You're touching on something that's my experience as well, is that it gave me anxiety as a young child, because I was like, oh my God, like, is this the future? What is the future? Like, I don't, like, what?
But you're missing the point, because what we nearly need to look at that time, and I'm kind of giving away next week's lecture, and that is look at how you feel when you're having that experience, because that's the real issue. That we know from physics that time does not loop. We know from causality and cause effect that this is not what we know to be a deja vu. It's the experience and the feeling of it being done before. But if we keep inspecting, we'll
Even dreaming
recognize
it?
that you don't know for sure. We're talking about when you experience it and you say, I'm having a deja vu.
And that's when I get
Instead
the
of,
memory
okay,
of
a
like,
lot of people want to go back to when did this happen before? Was it in a dream or whatever? And what I'm saying is, no, we need to stay in this present moment for it. But we'll talk about this next time. This is going to take a while to talk through. All right,
awesome.
but it has more to do with the feeling that we have that this has all happened before.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
That's what it is. It's a feeling that has to be investigated, experienced, because it's actually quite awesome. It's an awesome experience.
I can't wait, because I've always wondered, I've never known what to do with this experience that keeps happening to me.
Look
I,
closely.
yeah,
That's the easy answer, and we'll talk about it.
I'll look closely. I'll look
Reuse
for
of
it.
coming attractions. Yeah, call me again. This is
I will.
getting a little long in the tooth, and so we'll finish this one now, and we'll talk next time. Today we've covered importance. Who's important? Who's important?
No one.
Nobody home. We'll see you.